kick off this discussion. Relevance and scale are obviously at Amazon, two things that we spend a great deal of time worrying about. As Morgan said, my name is Don Parsons. I am the Director of Global Email. Mainly what that means is I spend all my days worrying about whether we're getting performance out of our programs and how our customers are reacting to them. I did also challenge Morgan. I gave him, in addition to those other tidbits, I also gave him the fact that I'm probably the only failed Byzantine historian in the room. Any others? So we have one. As you can see, Morgan failed the challenge and did not work it into the pitch. Amazon is, I think as everybody knows, as an online vendor, a very scaled company. Millions of customers, millions of products, and constant effort to try to match those two things up in a relevant way. A lot of our reputation is built on the customer's perception and our ability to match things up, find things in our vast array that seem to make sense for customers. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that sort of over the next half hour or so, about how we try to do that in email and some of the concepts and ideas that we use to guide us as we're putting together email programs. Hopefully some of those things will be useful. You'll hear a few themes as well, I think, even echoing some of the things I think Sean was saying earlier. I also noticed a trend that the West Coast guys who flew in last night are the ones they're putting on first. So we'll have to speak to the conference team about that one. If I sit down to take a nap, that's when you need to shoot the darts at me. So for the next half hour, I'm going to talk a little bit about the concepts and ideas that we use and we like to use at Amazon to try to make these practices real with a few discursions. But before I sort of slide off into the world of big data, let me start with a real simple concept that is actually central to sending email, and that is that email is a conversation. It's a little bit of a trope, I think, these days, but it's important to keep that in mind. It's really two individuals talking. Very easy for us on our side of the sending sphere to forget that because we're talking to millions of people at a time. But from a customer's perspective, it's never more than two people talking. And there are things in that make that conversation work. Some sense of history. I know what we were talking about last time and the time before. I know how you reacted to it. I know the topics that we like. A sense of context, right? I know the context of the conversation. My friends and I can spend a long time talking about how wonderful the Boston Red Sox are, but it's a very short conversation when it gets to the New York Yankees. And that's a context that's important when you come and talk to me later about baseball. And the last concept I always like that we think a lot about is this concept of tolerance. Actually, Sean gave us earlier a great example of tolerance, but this is really you go home, you say to your spouse, you know, gee, I had this terrible day, this merchandiser built this email, and the subject line was all about deals, but there were no deals in the mail, and the landing page was wrong, and blah, 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 and your spouse gives you some version of, yeah, isn't that terrible? The hint, of course, she actually doesn't care, but she's tolerant to that conversation because there's history and context, right? You've had this conversation before. She's tolerant of the fact that you're going to go off from time to time on occasion, as hopefully you are of her as well. That's what makes those conversations work over time. Now the good news, go backwards. The good news is the exact same concepts work pretty well in business. History is pretty straightforward. You follow the history of your conversations with a customer. We talked a little bit about, you heard a little bit about this in Sean's presentation, about the need to capture the data that you're seeing from a customer over time. Something that Amazon that we've really been built upon is grabbing a hold of that data. Every interaction is a moment of learning, and you need to grab a hold of that, and you need to hold as much of that as you can. Context works very similar. One difference in context, which your customer is keeping in mind, is that they remember this is a business conversation. They remember the business context. That means they have certain expectations of it, and if you are using that history and context well, they're going to have some tolerance for you as you mix your commercial messages into that conversation. Now, I love to use the example of the barista because I do come down here from the coffee-obsessed Pacific Northwest. Only had one coffee today, so that's probably going to be a problem. But if you think about it, when you go to a coffee shop, the barista, if you've been there many, many times, certainly the barista at my coffee shop, she recognizes me when I walk in the door. She knows my order, right? Large coffee, drip coffee, morning glory muffin, every morning, regular as clockwork. So that's already up there waiting for me. She remembers the conversation, maybe I was doing something on the weekend, so she has this little store of information about me from the interactions that we've had. And as a customer, if she volunteers to me, well, gee, you always get this drip coffee, why don't you try this fancy Clover thing? It's a little more expensive, but it tastes better. Even though I don't really want it, I'm tolerant of her having offered that. It makes sense inside that conversation. So it makes sense for her to add that in. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't get it, but it doesn't bother me at all. I'm not a good customer in that regard. Let me show you one example of how this works in an email. And this particular flow is actually one of the longest standing programs we've had at Amazon. So I'll talk about that in a sec. So let's imagine you've got a customer, they come to Amazon, they like, these happen to be books from a series of books called the Inspector Montalbano series. They buy them all the time. They come out, customer buys them right away. They always like to buy the hard copy. They never buy the digital copy, but they buy them as soon as they're available. So as we pay attention to that customer, we recognize that as soon as the next novel in that series is coming out, it's going to make a lot of sense to send them a message that says, hey, do you want to pre-order from this book series that you've read so much? You're going to have a very, very high tolerance from the customer because the history and the context are right. Right? You've continued a conversation. Now you'll also notice in this particular email, underneath the main call out, which is the new novel, do you want to buy it, there's also another row of books. So one of the things we also do there is we inject into that row of books either other authors by the same other titles by the same author, which is what this one is showing, or other similar titles or authors. This is the equivalent of asking if you want to try the Clover today. Because it's consistent with the conversation, it has context, it has history, even though it's more than might be expected, customers actually respond to it extremely well. This program is called Single New Product. Don't ask me why. Amazon has been setting this probably for a decade, long before my time, and it continues to be an unbelievably successful program, and it's predominantly based on this notion of history. If you can find things in your history with a customer that allow you to pull out and send a message, it's always extremely well received. It's always relevant. I mainly use the word relevant because there's a specific number of times you have to say relevant in any email conference. So I think you do need to count as I go along. But this is always going to be a relevant and well-received message. Customers are always going to be happy to see it. So even though this program is as old as it is, we run it fundamentally unchanged. We've changed the filtering and some of the logics, but this essentially works the same. As you look at the history that you're capturing with your customers and the transactions that they're doing with you, I think what you'll find, as we've found, is this type of conversation has many, many, many applications. A very significant portion of our email is actually basically versions of this mail. So we send more than one, considerably more than 1 in 5 of our messages have basically this structure, sort of a very powerful and simple structure. Let's go back to our barista and begin to talk a little bit more about scale. Let me break this one down first. This first question is sort of what happens so a barista can remember. Starbucks did a study once upon a time. I don't know if there's anyone from Starbucks here, but I can't remember the numbers. A good barista can remember 200 customers at some level of detail. 300 customers, not so much, right? There's a certain amount of storage and a certain amount of processing you can do in your brain pan. And I guess the number is something like 200 customers they can recall. So what happens as these conversations start to scale? Generally, the first thing to go is context. It's actually pretty straightforward when you think about it. The context of the dialogue actually requires more processing to determine. You have to run more data, you have to think about it more deeply to understand the context around the conversation. Straight history is quite a lot easier. Generally, as you scale, context goes first. You want to watch out for that in your emails. Are you sending emails that just don't make sense? Are you including products or services or offers in that email that when you actually think about it from a customer sense perspective don't make sense? You don't have a good reason to do it. You're probably beginning to lose context at scale. And I also want to point out, try to keep in mind there's 2 places where scale is going to catch you. The obvious one that I'll mainly talk about is number of customers, right? You just go have 10 customers, then 100 customers, then 1 million customers, then 10 million customers. Second place, though, where scale comes in is in the service side. What are you offering? What are you talking about? So Amazon started many years ago as a bookstore predominantly. So we talked about books, a lot of intelligence around books. Then we added other media. So you've got movies, you've got DVDs, right? Then we added other products. So today, Amazon is a store that can sell you the book and the movie and the toothpaste to brush your teeth before you go watch the movie, and the popcorn you're going to eat while you're at the movie, and the chair you want to sit in while you're watching the movie, and the TV with a good sound card because you want to be able to hear it well. So we have so many messages. That scale also creates exactly the kind of confusion. And product scale creates these context confusions pretty regularly. Second thing you tend to lose is history, even if you're doing a good job tracking and storing the data. The reason the history gets lost is because it gets hard to process it back at the right time. You lose your ability to sort of like pull all the data together, and at that moment of the customer interaction, remember that, oh yeah, this is the one that liked baseball, but that was the Red Sox, but not the Yankees, so don't talk to them about the Yankees, talk to them about the Red Sox. So those pieces don't come together at the right time. And when you talk to your customers with neither history nor context, this is what the world begins to look like to them. You lose tolerance. They're going to turn off your messages. Either you're going to get a quick opt-out, or more likely you're going to get a silent opt-out. Outgo your emails, nothing happens. Outgo your emails, nothing happens. And then you end up having to invest a lot more in that customer to try to get them to pay attention again. You've got to reprove yourself. Suddenly you're in the land of 20% off coupons to try to get them to open up your email. Not a good land to be. So my finance guys tell me. All right, so why do we do it? Why do we take on this sort of problem of scale? Why don't we work hard on simplifying our world? And the reason is scale rocks. Scale is great. It is business success. You want tons of customers. You want them buying tons of products. You want to sell tons of products. You want to have the problem of big data. You want to hear the customer's voice in that way. I'll talk more about this later, but all that data that creates the issues and problems, the challenges, that's all your customer talking to you. All their voices and all their words. The challenge of digging through that and finding intelligent ways to deal with it is fantastic. It's the fun of a lot of what we do. Now, a team told me at this point I'm supposed to do like a situation thing and show my abs or something, but I've opted not to, just because it's breakfast and all. So, and I do think they'll put the tattoo on for you later if you want that particular tattoo. So let's think a little bit about scale. Talk about the problems, and this is kind of how we break it down. Do it in a simple way. Talk a little bit about infrastructure and a little bit about messaging. I'm not going to talk a lot about infrastructure, although it is important. There are a lot of folks in the room who can talk about the infrastructure and components better than I. Some sessions as well that'll start to break that down. But there's some real problems with your infrastructure as you scale, some of which I've listed here. Storage gets both more expensive, thanks to Moore's law, not outrageously so, but it gets costly. It becomes much harder to process and much harder to put together. And those are the real challenges with scale. You may have all the observations you need about a customer, but can your systems run through them fast enough to make them relevant at the moment of the dialogue? Requires some very specialized horsepower to do that in specialized data structures. For those of you who've been around as long as I, remember when sort of the notion of relational databases were the big deal thing. Those days are past, sadly, and those concepts just don't work at these scales and sizes. And it creates a need for a certain degree of expertise. If you don't have specialists, you begin to have issues. If you can't get excited about arguing about how to scale a random forest algorithm of above 200 features, you're going to have trouble in this world. Or you're going to have to find somebody who does. Now, the good news here, and this is the required shameless plug alert, there's lots and lots of services that actually will do this work for you. Tons of places, AWS, Amazon Web Services happens to be one of them. But a lot of places that you can go that can do the scale processing and bring you the basic intelligence you need to process big chunks of data. If you're running into issues at your organization where the big chunks of data are presented as the reason not to do better interactions with your customers, that's fundamentally an excuse, not a reason. There's ways to do this that are pretty inexpensive and that are pretty effective. I think that's my only shameless plug, so you don't have to see the alarm again. Let's talk now more about messaging strategy. This is more the part that I spend my days worrying about. And there's a few concepts here I want to talk about. I'll spend more time on relevance, because I have to. But I'll give you a few comments and context. And what I'm trying to talk about here are ways that, particularly at Amazon, as we face the challenges of delivering relevance at scale, the way we look at the mails that we produce and send, the way we try to structure them together so that they create that meaningful dialogue with the customer. Start with pace. Pace is actually, I think, probably the most common, and this is frequency. So imagine that I know you like the Inspector Montalbano novels. I know there's a new one coming out. So I send you an email on it, that's fine. And then I send you a second email on it, that's still okay. Send you a third email on it, that's all right. By the time I get to 12 or 14 or 18, you're probably losing tolerance. The history and context is clear. You know why Amazon is sending you this mail. You're just a little aggravated that Amazon continues to send you the mail after you've ignored it. Pace is a problem as your products start to scale. It's very easy to build a bunch of those programs like I built earlier that are triggered that just send out emails at a very, very rapid rate. You need to build in some kind of automated systems, and what we've done in Amazon is built in some message level filtering that actually captures those counts and speeds up or slows down based on the value of the message and the customer receptivity to it. And customer receptivity to it is in fact the definition here. What is the pace that is too fast? When does pace become a landslide? Whenever the customer says pace becomes a landslide. Cadence. This one's a little different. One that we look at, and the most frequent question I get is, why do you have both pace and cadence? Aren't they just the same thing? I suppose in some ways they are. But what we're thinking about here is mix. This comes from that product side of the scale problem. If I have 10 great messages I want to talk to you about, and I talk to you about all 10 at one time, they begin to look jarbled, right? So think of Amazon. We've got the book you like to read, and the movie you like to watch, and the toothpaste you like to use in the morning to brush your teeth, and the chair you like to sit in while you're watching, and the TV that you want to watch your morning program on. If I give you a message about all 5 of those things at the same time, it begins to just look screwy. Why do I have a TV and toothpaste in the same email? Why did you send me a TV at 9 o'clock in the morning and toothpaste at 10:30? It makes no sense at all. What happens here is, unlike pace where you lose tolerance first, here you lose context, you lose history. Customers become unable to see it. It's a little bit of a problem. The saying on our team is, 2 good Italian restaurants is a choice, 10 good Italian restaurants is a chore. Don't present, even if they're great things, when you over-present, it becomes fuzzy in your customer minds. What are you talking about? Why are we on this topic? You have to find ways to group those messages together. I'll give you an example. Pretty hard to put toothpaste and TVs in the same email because customers are thinking about them in different ways. But if you know that your customer is a deal seeker, what they're looking for is great sales, and you have a great sale on a TV and a great sale on, I guess, bulk toothpaste. I'm not sure if you can have a great sale on a tube of toothpaste. You can actually bring those messages together because you're not talking to your customer about TVs or toothpaste. You're talking to them about great deals that you have to offer. So get the conversation into the right context, bring those messages together so that they start to sound together like a chord rather than a bunch of random notes on the piano. And the last one is conflict. There's 1,000 ways you're going to run into questions of conflict. The most obvious, and the one I want to spend more time on here, is really conflict between messages. So you got 5 good things to say. You want to say them all right now. You know they're all relevant to the customer. Which one are you going to send? As you scale up, it becomes impossible to make any sort of involved decision about that. So you can't sit at your desk in the morning and say, bring me every conflicting set of messages and I will decide which message goes out today. There's just too many of them and it's not that much fun, and then everyone yells at you and hates you. So what we've done at Amazon is we've come up with some relatively simple algorithms to try to solve this problem for us. And what we do is we actually take every email message that we send and we condense it down through some processes. We condense them down to a single metric. So a single metric that compares revenue-based data and customer receptivity to an email-based data to try to get a metric that combines how important is this thing for the company and how important is this thing for the customer. And remember what I said earlier about tolerance. It's perfectly okay in the context of a good conversation to bring up something that's important to you as a company, even if it's not necessarily important to the customer. So many people here, everyone here I suspect knows about Kindles, Amazon's Kindles. I hope many of you have the readers. I hope those of you that, I should go back to my shameless plug alert. Imagine the siren going. You should get one if you don't have one, they're fabulous. But when we come out with a new launch of Kindles, it's very important to us as a company. It's very important to some subsegment of our customers, but there's a much broader segment we're going to talk to about it. In the context of a commercial conversation, as long as the other conversations are fine, that's an okay interruption. It's an okay extra thought. And we find as customers tolerate it well if in general your behavior has been good with them. If they generally trust your messages, then a certain amount of injection of other topics that are of interest or potentially of interest are actually extremely well tolerated. It's conflict. Now what I want to do is talk a little bit deeper then under this area of relevance and defining relevance. And I want to use this as a framework to talk about a few of our data practices at Amazon and some of the ways we like to sort of cook through our large data. So I did a little bit of research, thanks to Google, looking up definitions for relevance to try to come up with something snappy that I could put up. They were either too short or too long. But almost every definition of relevance has, and everyone in this room will recognize these three features. Right message, right timing, right customer. They're there in every single message. And they're a very useful way to think about how you create relevant messages to your customers. One place where these messages generally fall short, though, is they actually don't tell you how. How do I know the right message from the wrong message? How do I know the right timing from the wrong timing? How do I know the right customer from the wrong customer? Now, the good news is, at Amazon, we've discovered there's one answer to that question. It's the same answer. Bonus points to anyone who remembers this reference. You can come by later and give me the quiz answer. There's one thing that is actually the same. It answers every one of these questions. And again, it's the customer decides. The customer is the only one that's going to know whether your message is right, whether you've got the right customer, whether or not you've got the right timing. So, give you a simple example. If I have a fantastic deal on a television set, and I send you that fantastic deal on a television set the day before you bought a television, that's a super relevant message, super well received. Send you that same email the day after you bought the television set, it's a really, really, really bad idea. Really bad idea. Really bad idea. You'll get the phone call on that. Those are the ones that we always send accidentally to Jeff Bezos, and then he calls me and wonders why he got an email and whether or not I'll give him that deal even though he already bought the TV. The answer is yes, by the way, just FYI. So what I want to try to do is use those three definitional frameworks just as a way to think about some of the examples for how we think about using data. I'm going to start with the right message. How do you figure out the right message? How do you figure out, remembering that the right message is defined by the customer? So you start by looking hard at the data set that you're working at. I'm going to use the example of a commercial message. So let's say we have a customer. We'll use this handsome devil. So you have a customer or a set of customers who have bought the product. They like the message. They're happy with the message. You take a look at that customer and you dig through the data that you've got. You look at their transactional data. You look at their browsing behavior. If you've got useful demographic data, you look at the demographic data. Find the commonalities in the population of customers that like your message, and then use that commonality to pull together a model that begins to find other customers who look like the customer that you found. And one personal learning from this presentation that I'll share with you all for free is that when your team volunteers to help you with your presentation, just say no. Just say no. Because now when you go back to your office and folks ask you, well, how was the conference? You'll say, there was this guy from Amazon, I don't remember what he said, but he looked a lot like Homer Simpson. The good news in this, aside from the Homer Simpson, is that I did ask for Brad Pitt, by the way. They totally overruled me. The good news with this is what happens is when you have a good message, you have a good deal for that television set, there's a pretty straightforward technique that allows you to find a much larger audience for whom that will be the right message. This basic concept is now the core to most of the messages that we send at Amazon. So as we think about this concept and that earlier concept, the history-based trigger messages, those are a very, very big portion of our emails. Because they are highly relevant to the customer. They solve some core problems about being right to the customer's mind with the messages that you're sending. This can be extremely complicated, and I'm now going to move on to the next point because Homer and I just not feeling it. The models can be complicated, but once you've got them set up and running, and you keep feeding back in the new data you're getting from the customers to make those models smarter, what you find is it helps you create great conversations that hone in tighter and tighter on the customer. One note though before I talk a little bit about lift modeling. I probably should have thrown one Brad Pitt in there. It's something that Amazon has done for a long, long time, is this notion of throwing in a wild card. So if I'm going to recommend a bunch of books to you as an example, I don't want to only recommend books that I'm 100% sure you're going to like, because it makes it impossible for me to learn more about you as a customer. So I'm going to throw something in that's a little bit off that beaten path to see what you do with it. Do you click on it? Do you look at it? Do you buy it? Do you browse it? And if I can find ways that I can extend from Inspector Montalbano to some other set of novels, I'm going to learn more about you as a customer, and you as a customer are going to have more voice with Amazon as a result, and you're going to be able to do more with that. Let's take a look at right timing. Lift modeling is another very important concept that we have. Let's take a simple example. Let's imagine that we're sending out an abandoned cart email. So you've put some stuff in your cart, you didn't buy it right away. We want to send you out a reminder that says, hey, you forgot the stuff in your cart, please buy it. So imagine that gray area is in essence the money you were going to make if you did nothing at all. Often what you do is you send out an email very, very quickly after that abandoned cart incident happens. So right away, out it goes. If you didn't buy it within 30 seconds, I'm going to ping you with an email to say, hey man, don't forget the cart, don't forget the cart. And what we found is you need to actually test quite a lot around that timing. You have to test in and out. And the reason that you're testing in and out is that what you're actually looking for is not that gray area, but the orange. You need the lift over normalized performance. That's what you're targeting for. The money is all in that lift. So your models have to be able to distinguish between stuff that you would have gotten had you done nothing at all, and stuff that you're going to get by doing something extra. And testing around your common notions, particularly things like timing. When should I send an email? How much time should there be between emails? Will go a long way towards helping you better understand and helping your models better refine how much actual lift am I getting from this activity. I don't know how attribution works at everyone else's shop, but we find attribution to be an ongoing, difficult conversation with very different points of view at Amazon. Depending on your attribution model, you may end up in a scenario where that first arrow actually looks like the better email to send. Because you're sending it farther up that gray curve, you get to take credit for everything that happened in that whole since the cart got abandoned, as opposed to just the lift that the second arrow tends to pull out. This is one of the places where your other structures, particularly things like attribution, can actually lead you to make decisions that are not in the best interest of either the customer or of you. That first message here is actually not that useful to the customer. Didn't help them make their decision in this particular case, whereas the second message did. It's also not at all useful to the business. In the first message, we spent money to craft and send an email, didn't get any of that money back because we got what we would have gotten had we done nothing. And I'm a big believer when the best course of action to get the best result is to do nothing. I'm a big believer in doing nothing. Last model, and this is the right customer question. And I want to return to this notion of your data is your customer's voice. All that stuff that you're capturing is your customer talking to you. And you're capturing it, thinking about it, processing it, testing against it, is your listening to your customers. That's the nature of the dialogue. We believe this pretty firmly at Amazon. In the introduction, Morgan quoted our Amazon strives to be the world's most customer-centric company. And there's two things in there I always like to point out. One is, when we talk about customer-centric, we take this notion of this dialogue extremely seriously. Spend an enormous amount of time and effort making sure that we are both capturing the voice of and working to understand that voice as it's embodied in our data. And the second thing I'll also point out is the word strives. Very seldom see at Amazon any claim that we are, because we think that we are always becoming. There's no voyage at Amazon that's complete. Let me give you an example. Hopefully folks can mainly see this lovely chart. I'll give you an example of letting the data have its voice. Now this lovely chart is actually two of those look-alike style models plotted against each other. One going across the horizontal, one going across one back to front, one across left or right. That kind of smooth slope in the back right, that's actually the targeted for population. So in this case, for a particular product, that smooth slope in the back is who we built the target to go after. Folks that wanted to have a conversation with Amazon about a certain product set. Now, typically what's going to happen with this kind of a modeling exercise is you're going to end up with two conversations coming out of this. One conversation, which is going to be a message aimed at that smooth peak in the back right, talking to the customers who you're pretty sure are going to want that product. And a second conversation, which is going to be a conversation to everybody else. And usually that second conversation is either the same message but less frequently, or no message at all. But we think that's a failure in not watching your data. These spikes represent, in this particular case, we've kind of anonymized all the grids here. I wish, otherwise these customer sets would indicate in this marketplace we have like 280 million customers. I wish that was true. But these represent number of customers. So if you think of that grid with all those placements, that's just straight stack ranking of customers. So you have all these other really interesting spiky areas where a customer is trying to tell you something. And if we do this simple message, I talk to the folks I've modeled in the back right corner and I ignore the rest, I'm missing those voices. And I'm missing all of these interesting customer sets. So, and I won't spend a lot of time on these, but if you take a look sort of in the lower side there, you've got a bunch of folks who are deal seekers. They will purchase in this product family, but they're fundamentally driven only by the quality of the deal. So the folks in my current targeting in the back right, those folks I need to talk about the product. I need to explain maybe features, maybe benefits, right? I need to have that kind of a conversation. Those folks down in the front that are deal seekers, well, they need to know that too, but that conversation has to mainly be about the quality of the deals. If the deal quality is good enough, then they will act. They're not going to act because this happens to be the best product in its class. That's not the conversation they want to have with you. Point out one other one, and it's a little harder to see, but if you look way in the back left, you see that little ridge that sort of pops up in the data that we're calling impulse buyers. So what we find is that there's a certain population, and they're predictable, that like to buy the candy bar in the checkout counter, right? They're always grabbing that People magazine or Us magazine in the checkout counter. They will purchase a product on an impulse. Their conversational behavior won't necessarily predict they're just about to do it. So what you worry about in these cases, and what we try to do at Amazon, is make sure when we're sending out an email on some set of topics, particularly to that population, that we give them some selection that is conducive to window shopping. So we make sure there's a row of call-outs in the email that are mainly about candy bars and People magazine, or at least the Amazon equivalent of candy bars and People magazine, because that is also a conversation that we know that customer wants to have with us. So out of this data set, rather than generating two conversations, it's actually very easy just by looking at the largest populations of customers and drilling down and understanding their behaviors to create a bunch of conversations that are far more meaningful to the customer. And because they're far more meaningful to the customer, they're far more meaningful to us as a business out of this same set of data exercises. It's how you can create power that takes 100 good models and turns into really good conversations for 150 million people, is by really looking hard at this data. So what I want to close with, and just sort of remind folks one last time about listening to the voices, not just the ones in your head, although they can be pretty insistent too, but listening to the voices of your customer. Always think of this data problem, this data challenge, as a challenge about hearing those many voices. In this room, between folks who provide systems and tools that let us send great email, and folks who are actually in charge of sending great email, these are all conversations that we collectively own. Morgan mentioned at the beginning sort of accountability, and I appreciate his saying that. He's probably being too nice to us, just to break the bubble. One of my favorite emails this year is actually an email that we made ESPN on. I don't know if anyone saw this one. We sent out an email on the BCS title game, congratulating the winners, Notre Dame, Alabama. We made the mistake of sending that email at about 6 o'clock in the morning before the game was run. So, doesn't protect you from certain issues. There's still other practices you have to worry about. There's a better social media story in that one than there actually is an email story, but we recovered. But you're going to find that if you're doing this, if you're paying attention to the customers, if you're paying attention to the message that they're giving you, even those kinds of missteps are extremely well tolerated. We got a little bit of bad press, and not much as it turns out, and certainly a number of internal investigations trying to figure out, well, how do you not do that again? We actually got no customer feedback. A couple of jokes got posted. Folks thought it was kind of funny, but actually not a single customer complained. Not a single customer sent us a note. Not a single customer opted out from that particular email. I'm going to guess the Notre Dame guys opted out later, but that totally different reason. And it's part of the generating the tolerance by having good conversation. So the challenge to all of you, over the next couple of days, you've got a lot of great panels, a lot of great discussions. They're going to give you a lot of ideas on ways that you can manage your data, track your data, look at your data, talk to customers, and build better messages for your customers. So the challenge for all of you, enjoy the party, own that conversation, and have great conversations with the customers. Thank you.